I always imagined my life unfolding in a neat, predictable pattern: meet the love of my life, get married, settle into a comfortable routine, and watch our family grow with happiness as the years went by. For a while, it felt like that was exactly how things were going to be. My wife, Michelle, was charming from the very first day we met, all warm smiles and gentle touches. She knew how to make me feel special with her quiet sincerity and that subtle sparkle in her eyes whenever she looked at me. We dated for 3 years, married in an outdoor ceremony by a lake, and immediately began planning our future. I thought our bond was rock solid. We supported each other's aspirations, made time for date nights even after hectic days at work, and laughed at jokes only we could truly understand. Sometimes, I'd look around at other couples and feel proud, maybe even a bit smug, because I believed our connection was beyond reproach. I had no clue how fleeting that sense of security was. Things began changing a couple of years into our marriage, but so slowly that I barely noticed at first. Michelle started coming home from work exhausted. She blamed it on a new project that demanded extra hours. She still tried to be sweet and loving, but there was a slight edge of detachment in our conversations, like she had something on her mind that she didn't know how to talk about. I told myself we were just in a stressful period. Work, bills, life, it weighed on everyone eventually, right? I'd seen it happen to plenty of couples. They'd go through these lulls, but if their foundation was strong, they'd get through it. Our foundation, I thought, was unbreakable. Over time, those small changes in Michelle's behavior compounded. She spent more time texting on her phone, or so I noticed. It felt like she was a little less present with me, as though her mind was constantly elsewhere. When I asked if everything was okay, she would smile and say something reassuring, but not once did that nagging feeling in my gut go away. It was an instinct that told me things were not as they seemed. Rather than confront her with my vague suspicions, I chose to wait, to trust her, certain that if there was an actual problem, we could talk it out. But no conversation ever came. One Sunday morning, as I was cleaning up the kitchen after breakfast, Michelle walked into the living room and picked up her car keys without warning. She said she had errands to run. Normally, she'd tell me what she was off to do, but instead she just left in a hurry. When she came back in the afternoon, I asked how everything had gone, but she offered some sparse explanation about picking up groceries and stopping by the pharmacy. That should have been normal enough, except there was no grocery bag, and she had nothing in her hands. Trying not to sound accusatory, I asked if she forgot to buy anything, and she said something like, "I'll go another day," then retreated upstairs. Each time I tried to recall the exact details, I realized there were inconsistencies. But I pushed it out of my mind. I loved her. I would not let myself think the worst. Then, little cracks in our routine started to show. Michelle started receiving phone calls late at night. Sometimes, her phone would vibrate around midnight, and she would flip its screen down and pretend she hadn't noticed. On several occasions, she took the phone call in the bathroom or the garage, speaking in hushed tones. My questions about who was calling that late were met with generic comments about some colleague who doesn't respect boundaries. I told myself she was simply trying to keep her work from bleeding too much into our personal life. Yet, the behaviors multiplied. She would spend more time than ever scrolling through social media, or so she said, but she refused to let me see her screen. When I tried to slide closer to her on the couch, she'd subtly angle her phone away. I recall the tension in her body, the way she'd shift if my eyes strayed too close to the device. All of it should have been a warning sign, but I was determined not to jump to conclusions. Over the next few weeks, Michelle seemed to grow distant in every sense of the word. If I leaned in for a gentle kiss, she'd turn her head. She stopped asking me how my day went. Even our once lively dinner talks faded into occasional nods and short answers. Her late nights at the office grew more frequent. She returned home with a blank expression, or sometimes an odd mixture of guilt and relief. We stopped having our regular Friday movie nights. She made excuses about headaches or important tasks that couldn't wait. When we did watch something together, she seemed glued to her phone, half listening to me, half paying attention to the screen. Intimacy, both emotional and physical, dwindled. It got to a point where we would go to bed without speaking a word. Then, she'd slip out of bed early in the morning before I'd woken up, sneaking her phone with her into the bathroom. I felt our marriage unraveling one day at a time, and I was powerless to stop it without proof of what was happening. I remember the exact day I found the burner phone. That morning, Michelle was rushing again, rummaging around in the closet for an outfit, claiming she was late for a meeting. She hadn't seen that I'd already brewed a pot of coffee. When she realized it, she muttered a thanks, poured herself a cup, and gulped it down in 2 large swigs before darting back into the bedroom. I had never seen her so frazzled. After she left, I went into the bedroom to make the bed and noticed a small black phone slip out from under her pillow. At first glance, I thought it was her usual phone, that maybe she'd forgotten it, but then I saw her actual phone charging on the dresser. My heart pounded. This was a cheap, prepaid burner phone, nothing like her sleek, up-to-date smartphone. It was old, scuffed along the edges, with a cracked corner. My breath caught in my throat. I suddenly felt like my lungs couldn't take in air. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a backup phone for emergencies. But she'd never mentioned needing a backup phone. Why hide it under her pillow? I picked it up, my hands trembling, and pressed the power button. A dull screen lit up, asking for a passcode. Panic surged through me, but I was also burning with curiosity, with dread, with that unstoppable need to know what was going on. I spent the next several minutes trying birthdays, anniversaries, and various combinations I thought Michelle might use. After a few attempts, the phone locked me out for a while. The sinking feeling in my stomach told me I was about to uncover something I wasn't prepared to handle. But I couldn't leave it alone. I needed answers. That evening, I couldn't confront her right away. I wanted to see what was actually on the phone before accusing her of anything. She came home late again, apologized half-heartedly for missing dinner, and went straight to the shower. I slipped into the kitchen, took out the burner phone from where I'd hidden it in my sock drawer, and tried more passcodes. Finally, I got in by using our old apartment number followed by her mother's birth year, something obscure, but apparently meaningful to her. My heart pounded so loud I felt sure Michelle would hear it from the bathroom. Inside, I found a flurry of text messages and call logs. A single contact name showed up over and over, Claire, though something about that name didn't feel right. It wasn't a real friend's name. My mind registered that it could be a cover identity. My eyes darted across the screen as I read. I can't wait to see you again. That last time was amazing. Are you alone tonight? When can we talk? I miss your voice. Call after call, text after text, the same contact, the same number. The conversation spanned over a month. My stomach churned as I scrolled further, trying to see if there were any photos. There were a few pictures, but they were mostly of darkened rooms, subtle selfies of Michelle in bed with the covers drawn around her in a way I'd never seen. Nothing too explicit, but intimate enough to make the betrayal concrete. Each photo was either taken late at night or during those afternoons when she claimed she was out running errands. I felt an icy chill run down my spine. She'd taken these photos in our bedroom, on our sofa, in our home, while lying to me. I couldn't think straight. All of the color seemed to drain from my surroundings as if the world had gone gray. I forced myself to stay calm, to not smash the phone or storm into the bathroom in a blind rage. Instead, I snapped screenshots with my own phone as evidence. I didn't know if I'd need them, but some survival instinct in my gut told me to protect myself. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to steady them against the kitchen counter. The texts were explicit enough. Reading Michelle's words, seeing how she talked with some stranger, or perhaps someone I knew, I had no idea, made me feel physically ill. My cheeks burned with anger and humiliation. How long had she been planning this? How long had I been living with a woman who secretly kept a second phone under her pillow? I heard the shower water stop, and the panic set in. If she found me with the phone, what would I say? Hiding a phone, I discovered, was one thing, but getting caught snooping through it was another. Maybe I should have confronted her, but my mind told me I needed more time to process. So I slipped the burner phone back into the sock drawer and jumped onto the couch, quickly turning the TV on to an inane reality show. My heart was hammering. When Michelle came downstairs, she had a towel around her neck, her hair still damp, wearing old sweats and a t-shirt. She offered me a half-smile, asked about my day, and sat next to me on the couch. I tried to keep my face neutral, to hide the torrent of betrayal roiling inside. She reached for my hand, a small affectionate gesture she hadn't done in weeks, and I almost recoiled. Something inside me snapped. I had to pull away because her touch felt like poison. That night, after she went to bed, I spent hours on the couch staring at the wall, my mind replaying every text I'd read, every sweet memory we shared now tainted by the knowledge of her duplicity. I wondered if I was a fool for not confronting her immediately. But a voice in my head kept whispering, she will just lie. She'll delete everything. She'll turn it around on you. I decided to keep the phone hidden. I kept it powered off so it wouldn't ring and betray itself. Over the next few days, my entire demeanor changed. I became distant, silent. Maybe Michelle noticed something was off, because she started acting strange, too. She was more jumpy, glancing around the house like she was expecting something to pop out at any moment. One night, I caught her rummaging around in the bedroom, checking under the mattress, the drawers, her closet shelf. She was looking for the burner phone, obviously. When I asked what she was doing, she claimed she was searching for a missing sweater. I almost laughed at how transparent she was. But I bit my tongue and pretended to believe her. When I returned to the phone a second time, I found more messages. There was a short thread of conversation that gave me a clue about who Claire really was. Have you told him anything yet? He's going to suspect eventually. Michelle replied, not a word. He's too trusting. It won't be an issue. Then, Claire wrote, I hate being a secret. I wish we could be together without pretending. Michelle, I know. But for now, we have to be careful. He can't find out. If he does, it'll ruin everything. I read those lines at least a dozen times, each repetition driving a spike deeper into my heart. The words were so cold, so callous, so dismissive of the life we'd built together. It wasn't just a fling. There was an emotional depth here, a familiarity that indicated Michelle and this person had been in contact for quite some time. Yet, the name Claire didn't feel right for a romantic affair. My instincts told me that Michelle had changed the name in her phone to disguise the real person. Was it a man? A woman? Someone from her workplace or an entirely different circle? The questions were endless, suffocating me every time I tried to breathe. One evening, Michelle announced she had a work trip coming up in 2 days, a conference in another city. Normally, if she had to travel for work, she'd give me more notice. She'd also mention details like the name of the hotel, her itinerary, how long she'd be gone. This time, she was vague. The moment she told me, her eyes flicked over to gauge my reaction. She must have seen the tension in my face, because she immediately followed up with an awkward laugh, explaining it was a last-minute business development opportunity. Still, something about the way her gaze darted away told me she was lying. She packed her suitcase the next night, carefully organizing everything, occasionally glancing at me as if making sure I wasn't going to question her story. I played along. I even wished her luck on her conference and offered to drive her to the airport. She said a coworker was picking her up. In that moment, it felt like I was watching a complete stranger in my wife's body. When she left on the morning of her supposed trip, I made a decision that I needed to get to the bottom of this once and for all. As soon as she walked out the door, I fished out the burner phone. The last message was from Claire, telling Michelle to have a safe trip and can't wait to meet you there. So this was no real conference. They were planning to meet in another city. My hands shook as I tried to find any location details. I couldn't locate a direct mention of the name of the hotel or the city in the texts. Most of it was cryptic: "I'll be waiting for you at the same place as last time," or "Don't forget the room we talked about." But one detail repeated: Redwood Inn. I knew that name. It was an older hotel about an hour away, near the state border, known for its scenic views and romantic atmosphere. We'd driven past it once on a weekend getaway, and Michelle had commented on how it looked quaint. I spent half an hour wrestling with my options. Part of me wanted to pack my own bag, show up at the Redwood Inn, and confront her right in the lobby. But I also didn't want to be blindsided if she had concocted a different plan. What if Redwood Inn was just a code for somewhere else? Alternatively, I could call a private investigator, but I had no idea who to contact on such short notice. Time was critical. If she was meeting someone there that day, I didn't want to give them a chance to escape or cover up the evidence. Every second that ticked by added to the frantic energy in my chest. Eventually, I decided I had to see for myself. I drove out that afternoon, telling my boss I had a family emergency. The highway stretched on, and my mind churned with possibilities. Could it be that Michelle was simply meeting a friend for some reason she felt I wouldn't approve of? Was there any chance this was a misunderstanding, and she was hiding something harmless? But the texts had been too explicit. My common sense wouldn't let me conjure up a scenario where this was all innocent. My stomach was in knots the entire drive, and the tension in my neck throbbed. I arrived at the Redwood Inn around 4 in the afternoon, parked in the back corner of the lot, and scanned the vehicles. I didn't see Michelle's car, which made sense because she'd told me a coworker was driving her. I took a deep breath, walked inside, and tried to look as inconspicuous as possible. The lobby was cozy, adorned with rustic decor and a fireplace that crackled softly. A single clerk worked the front desk, a young man in a pressed shirt. For a moment, I panicked, not sure what I was going to say if he asked who I was here to see. But he barely looked up from his computer. I ambled around, pretended to check out a brochure about local attractions, all the while straining my ears to see if I heard Michelle's voice. Eventually, I made my way into the hallway leading to the rooms. I had no clue which one she might be in, so I decided to do something risky. I sat in a small lounge area by the vending machines, a place where I could see guests coming and going. If Michelle walked by, I'd see her. An hour later, I was cramped, tense, and discouraged. Nobody resembling Michelle had passed by. The hallway was mostly empty except for a family and a few couples. I realized she might not be there yet, or she might already be in a room. This stealth approach could take all night. Gathering my courage, I returned to the front desk and asked the clerk if a Michelle under her maiden or married name had checked in. He politely apologized and said he couldn't give out guest information. I tried to keep calm, explaining that I was supposed to meet my wife, that she might have checked in under a different name. He repeated that he couldn't help me without seeing my reservation. I was about to leave when my phone buzzed. It was the burner phone in my pocket, which I'd stupidly forgotten to switch off. The screen showed a new message from Claire. I ducked into the corner of the lobby, using a potted plant as cover, and opened the text, "I'm here. Room 214. See you soon." My breath caught in my throat. That was all I needed. I found the stairwell and climbed it quietly, my pulse pounding in my ears. On the second floor, the corridor stretched left and right, lined with old carpeting and low lighting. I followed the numbers until I reached 214. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might burst. What if I was wrong? What if this was all a misunderstanding? I couldn't let myself hope. I stood there for a moment, listening. I thought I heard muffled voices, but it could have been the next room. My hand hovered over the door. I debated whether to knock or just burst in. That was when I heard laughter through the thin walls, a woman's laughter that I recognized too well. Michelle's laughter, no mistaking it. A lump rose in my throat, and I almost turned away. Some final shred of denial made me hesitate. But then I heard her say, in a playful, flirtatious tone, "I've missed you so much." And a lower voice responded, "I've been counting down the days." My entire world crashed down in that single moment. I knocked on the door with more force than intended, anger fueling the strength behind my fist. There was a pause, a hush on the other side. Then Michelle's voice, in a slightly panicked whisper, "Did you order room service?" The deeper voice said something I couldn't make out. After a few seconds, the door opened a crack. A woman I had never seen before peered out, hair disheveled, wearing a blouse partially unbuttoned. She wasn't trying to hide her face or body. She looked me up and down, her expression calm in a predatory way. Confusion flashed across her features, then realization, like she knew exactly who I was. I stared at her, trying to process the fact that Claire was indeed a woman, not a man. At that moment, Michelle appeared behind her, dressed in a bathrobe, her eyes widening. It was like I'd punctured the comfortable bubble of their affair. Michelle's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She reached out, her hand trembling, as though she wanted to explain. I stepped back, every nerve in my body screaming at me to either run or rage. My wife tried to stammer some kind of greeting or excuse, but the words died in her throat. The other woman, presumably Claire, just stood to the side, her arms folded, watching me with an inscrutable look. I couldn't even speak. My mind was flooded with images, Michelle kissing me on our wedding day, her promise that we'd always be honest with each other, the warmth of her smile when we were in love. All of that was obliterated by the sight of her standing there with a lover, her hair still damp from a recent shower, her lips parted in shock. I knew in that second that nothing between us would ever be the same again. I turned and walked away. Michelle shouted my name, but I didn't stop. I heard the door slam behind me, her hurried footsteps chasing me down the hallway. Adrenaline propelled me down the stairs, into the parking lot. She caught up to me by my car, grabbing my arm, tears already streaming down her face. "I can explain," she managed, voice shaking. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you have a secret phone? That you're with her?" I gestured wildly toward the hotel, unsure how to handle the wave of rage and humiliation flooding me. My voice echoed off the walls of the parking lot. Michelle sobbed, trying to hold onto my arm, but I shoved her away gently, not wanting to hurt her physically but unable to bear her touch. She started talking in a rush, saying it had just happened, that she was confused about her identity, that she didn't mean to hurt me, that she hadn't known how to tell me. A part of me registered that this was a deeper betrayal than simply cheating with some random coworker. It meant she had intentionally deceived me about who she was, or maybe she was even deceiving herself. But in that moment, it didn't matter. None of her confusion, her hidden desires, or her pleas made a dent in the raw pain I felt. She insisted she never planned to leave me, that it was a phase she was going through. That only fueled my anger. A phase? I repeated. A phase that involves lying to your husband, sneaking around with a burner phone, booking a room in a hotel? That's not a phase, Michelle. That's a choice you made over and over. She dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. A few passing guests stared from a distance, unsure if they should intervene. I couldn't stand the sight of her there, weeping like a victim, when I was the one whose world had just collapsed. So I got in my car. Her eyes flicked up to me in desperation. She stood, pounded once on the window, begging me to let her in, to listen. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream at her, but I couldn't speak without breaking into 1,000 pieces. So I turned on the ignition and sped off. The image of Michelle in my rearview mirror, tears streaming down her face, only confirmed how much damage had been done. The entire drive home felt surreal, like I was floating outside my body, watching events unfold in slow motion. I parked crookedly in our driveway, stumbled inside the house, and nearly collapsed onto the couch. My phone vibrated incessantly, texts, calls, from Michelle. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Eventually, I turned the phone off, wanting silence. My mind replayed every moment of our marriage, scanning for signs that I might have overlooked. Had she always been attracted to women and never told me? Or was it just Claire specifically? If she had told me she was questioning her orientation, would I have tried to support her? Instead, she'd chosen lies, secrets, gaslighting, betrayal. I felt sick, used, and heartbreakingly alone. I spent the night going back and forth between anger and sorrow. I screamed at the walls, cursed her name, then sank into despair, remembering how beautiful she looked on our honeymoon, how she'd once carefully planned a surprise birthday party for me. Those memories were like shards of broken glass, cutting deeper with each recollection. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep on the couch with tears drying on my face. When I woke up, it was still dark outside, maybe 4 or 5 in the morning. My first conscious thought was the horrifying truth: my wife had betrayed me and was in some hotel room with another person, someone she cared about enough to risk everything for. Maybe that was the real wound, that she'd choose anyone over the life we had built. Over the next 2 days, Michelle tried multiple times to come home, to talk to me, to beg for forgiveness. The first time she showed up, I almost slammed the door in her face, but she pushed her way inside, tears already falling. She confessed everything, or so she claimed. She'd met Claire at a networking event a few months back. There was an instant spark Michelle said she couldn't deny, a feeling she couldn't explain. She claimed she'd never felt that with any woman before, that she was just as shocked by it as I was. Yet, curiosity and attraction had led her to keep meeting Claire in secret. The burner phone was Claire's idea, to keep their communications hidden. Michelle tried to downplay it, saying she never intended to let it go this far, that it was just an emotional fling that turned physical once. But I'd read the texts, it was clear the affair had been ongoing. She insisted she still loved me, that she was confused, that she wanted time to figure it out. All I heard was her excuses. I sat across from her in the living room, hearing words come out of her mouth that sounded so rehearsed, so hollow. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered: do you want to be with her or with me? She opened her mouth, but no definitive answer came out. That was all I needed to know. If she wanted me, she wouldn't have hesitated. I told her to leave. She pleaded for a chance to stay, to try counseling, therapy, anything. My resentment boiled over. You had all the chances in the world to talk to me about your confusion, I snapped, my voice trembling with fury. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. Now you want me to fix this for you? I stood up, pointed to the door, and repeated, leave. She wept, promising she'd do anything I asked, but the damage was too extensive. The final image of her kneeling on the hallway floor, arms wrapped around herself, is still etched into my mind. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the texts, the photos, the phone calls in the middle of the night. The empathy I'd once had for my wife vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of betrayal. In the days that followed, I operated on autopilot. I went to work, pretended everything was normal with colleagues, avoided telling family or friends what had happened. How could I explain it? My wife cheated on me with a woman she met a few months ago, and she used a burner phone to hide it? It sounded absurd, like some soap opera twist that no one would believe. Eventually, I had to tell my sister, who noticed I wasn't myself. She was furious on my behalf, telling me to kick Michelle out, to file for divorce immediately. But I was conflicted. Michelle wasn't just some random stranger, she was the woman I'd spent years building a life with. As angry as I was, I also felt heartbreak deeper than I'd ever imagined. Part of me hated her, part of me still cared. My sister tried to remind me that Michelle had broken the most sacred trust we shared. I knew that. I still wasn't ready to face the finality of divorce. Michelle, meanwhile, bounced between remorse and confusion. She texted me apologies, long paragraphs analyzing her sexuality, and even asked me if we could open our marriage so she could continue seeing Claire. That request shattered any illusions I might have had left about salvaging what we once had. She was essentially asking for a pass to keep lying, keep living this double life. My anger reignited. When she visited again, I told her she needed to move out, that I couldn't keep her in our home while I decided what to do next. Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded, apparently realizing I was serious. She packed a suitcase, asked if she could return for the rest later. I told her I'd box up her things and leave them in the garage. She sobbed, muttering, "I'm so sorry," over and over. I shut the front door behind her, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself break down, sliding to the floor in tears. Even after Michelle left, I found remnants of her presence everywhere, her slippers by the bed, her perfume on the dresser. It hurt to see these pieces of our shared life. I spent a weekend systematically removing every trace of her from my immediate environment, boxing up clothes, photographs, little souvenirs from trips we'd taken. As I did, a flood of memories threatened to overwhelm me. I recalled her wide-eyed excitement on our honeymoon, the warmth of her hand in mine during lazy Sunday mornings, the whispered confessions of love we shared late at night. All of it was overshadowed now by images of that hotel room, that phone, and all the insincere words she'd spoken. I tried blocking her number, but she reached out via email, then even wrote me a letter. The letter detailed how she felt pressured by societal norms, how she'd never realized she might be attracted to women, how she still loved me but couldn't deny her feelings for Claire. She begged for understanding, for patience, for me to let her figure this out. I found myself reading it with a numb detachment. She'd had time to figure things out before crossing lines of trust and fidelity. She chose secrecy, lies, betrayal. She kept me in the dark while she explored this new identity. That, more than anything, crushed me. If she had come to me honestly, if she had said she was attracted to someone else, at least we could have confronted it together. Her decision spoke volumes about how little respect she had for our marriage. Eventually, I decided I needed closure. I met with a lawyer to understand my options. Each question the lawyer asked cut deep. Was there infidelity? Do you have evidence? Are there marital assets to consider? My mouth felt dry each time I answered, reliving the entire ordeal. The lawyer was sympathetic but professional, explaining the steps of filing, the potential for mediation, and how state laws might impact the process. At the end of the meeting, I felt both relieved that I was taking a step forward and devastated at what that step signified. The next day, I filed the paperwork for a legal separation, wanting a bit of a buffer before finalizing a divorce. Michelle was served a few days later, and she left a tearful voicemail on my phone that I couldn't bring myself to delete or listen to in full. I played the beginning, heard her broken voice, and ended the call. Word of our separation reached our families. My parents were stunned. They'd seen Michelle as a daughter they never had. Her parents tried calling me, apologizing, saying they didn't know she was going through this or that they might have done something to support us better. I had nothing to say. None of them could repair what was broken. Some well-meaning relatives urged me to forgive, to remember that love is patient and kind, that sometimes people make mistakes. But betrayal is not a simple mistake, it's a choice repeated in secret. I couldn't imagine pretending it was fixable. The hardest moment came about a month later. Michelle texted me, saying she wanted to meet one last time, that she had something important to share. I'd been avoiding her, but something about the wording made me think maybe it was some urgent matter. We met at a small cafe near downtown. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well in weeks. There was a nervous energy about her. I sat with my arms crossed, not wanting to give any indication that I was open to reconciliation. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, her eyes flitting between me and the table. "I'm sorry," she began. "I know I've said it 100 times, but I'll keep saying it because it's true. I should have told you what I was feeling instead of betraying you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I regret hurting you. I was confused about who I am. About what I want." Her voice broke, and she reached across the table for my hand. I didn't move. After a shaky breath, she continued, "Claire and it's not working out the way I thought. We had an intense connection, but it's not. It's not the fairy tale I imagined. I'm not even sure if I really love her. A part of me loves you, still." Tears welled in her eyes. "I guess I just wanted to say that. That if there's any chance," she trailed off, hope glimmering in her expression. I studied her face, remembering every line, every contour I once adored. She was the same woman physically, but I felt like I was looking at a ghost of someone who died the moment I found her burner phone. I stood up slowly, picking up my jacket from the back of the chair. "Michelle," I said, my voice low, "I don't know if you'll ever understand how deep this wound goes. It's not just about who you were with, it's about the lies, the deception, the phone calls in the middle of the night. It's about finding out that you can't be honest with me about who you are and what you want. That changes everything. I can't live the rest of my life wondering if you're telling the truth or if there's another secret phone hidden somewhere." She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. "I do hope you find peace with yourself. I hope you figure out your identity, and if it leads you to happiness, great. But I can't be the casualty in your journey of self-discovery. It hurts too much. So this is it for us." My voice cracked on the last sentence. I inhaled sharply to keep my composure. She closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. I felt a stir of pity for her, but it was quickly overtaken by the memory of her secret phone, of those texts that mocked the sanctity of our marriage. I left the cafe without another word. It's been a year since that day. The divorce went through a few months later. We have minimal contact, just enough to untangle the final legal matters. The process was agonizing, but I had support from family, friends, and eventually a therapist who helped me realize that while Michelle's confusion about her sexuality might be genuine, it in no way justifies the betrayal she orchestrated. I had to let go of the anger and focus on healing. Some days, I still find myself awake in the middle of the night, haunted by thoughts of what could have been if she'd only trusted me enough to talk, if we'd faced her questions together like a team. Then I remind myself that I deserve someone who respects me enough to be honest, no matter how difficult the truth is. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from that shock, from the devastation of discovering a secret burner phone that blew my life apart. But I'm learning how to live again, finding new hobbies, new friends, and maybe one day, a new love. In a strange way, I've come to see that the moment I held that cheap, black phone in my shaking hands was a turning point. It was the end of the illusions I had about a perfect marriage, and the beginning of a more honest relationship with myself. It forced me to confront how easily trust can be shattered, and how essential it is to communicate and be transparent in a partnership. The emotional scars remain, but I wear them as reminders that I survived something I once thought would destroy me. I've grown from that pain, and while I would never want to experience it again, I can't deny it taught me resilience. Ultimately, discovering that phone was like ripping off a bandage that had been hiding a wound. The pain that followed was excruciating, but at least now the wound can properly heal. Michelle occasionally sends a polite text or email to see how I'm doing. I rarely answer, and when I do, it's curt. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that her relationship with Claire ended abruptly. I don't have the details, and I don't seek them out. I suspect there's lingering regret on her part, maybe shame about the way everything played out. But that's her burden to carry, not mine. My job is to keep moving forward, to meet each new day with the understanding that I'm free from deception. If I ever find love again, I know I'll treasure honesty above all else. Sometimes, people ask if I have closure. I'm not sure closure is the right word. I think it's more that I accept that some parts of life don't come with neat conclusions. There's always going to be a puzzle piece missing, an unanswered why behind Michelle's actions. But I've found a measure of peace in knowing that I stood up for myself, that I refused to be gaslit or manipulated further. The hardest lesson was understanding that love can't thrive in the darkness of secrets, and once you shine a light on them, you might see the ugliness that was hidden all along. It's painful, but it's real. I look at the ring that used to mean everything to me, tucked away in a drawer I rarely open. Sometimes I wonder if I should sell it or toss it, but I can't quite bring myself to do it yet. It symbolizes a moment in time when I believed in an unbreakable union. Maybe I'm not ready to destroy that memory, even if it turned out to be an illusion. Healing isn't linear, and I'm taking it one step at a time. I've considered rewriting the narrative in my head, that Michelle isn't a monster, that she was just a flawed human being wrestling with personal truths she didn't know how to handle. It makes it easier to let go of the bitterness if I view her as someone who made terrible choices rather than someone who deliberately set out to hurt me. Still, the pain of that betrayal won't vanish overnight, or maybe ever. In the end, I think the only way forward is to accept that the woman I loved didn't exist the way I believed she did. She was always more complicated, more conflicted, and I never saw the signs until it was too late. If there's one thing I would tell anyone who suspects they might be living a lie, it's to confront it sooner rather than later. The agony of uncertainty is worse than the heartbreak of knowing. If I could go back in time, I'd have pressed Michelle for honest conversations at the first sign of her distancing herself from me. Perhaps we could have handled things differently. Or maybe it would have ended the same way. At least I wouldn't have wasted months in a spiral of doubt and confusion. But regrets can only teach us what not to repeat in the future. I'm determined to carry that lesson with me. My life now is quieter, more introspective. I spend evenings reading, working on personal projects, and going for solitary walks around the neighborhood. The silence, once oppressive, now feels like a friend. It no longer reminds me of Michelle's absence or the uneasy hush that descended between us in those final months. Instead, it gives me space to breathe, to think, to heal. On some nights, I even find myself hopeful about what lies ahead. There's a simple freedom in not having to worry about hidden phones, secret messages, or the constant anxiety of wondering if my partner's affections lie elsewhere. In time, I know I'll open my heart again. I'll trust someone enough to share my world with them. When that happens, I'll be more vigilant, more aware that love must be nurtured with honesty. And I'll expect the same in return, uncompromisingly so. The moment I discovered Michelle's secret phone, I realized there's no greater violation in a relationship than betrayal. But there's also no greater strength than learning you can survive it. Even if it shatters you, you can gather the pieces, rebuild yourself, and carry on. So that's the story of how I found my wife's burner phone and what it revealed. It's not just a simple tale of infidelity, it's a journey that forced me to confront the painful truth that the woman I married had grown into someone unrecognizable. It broke my heart, tested my self-worth, and left me with emotional scars. But it also reminded me that I deserve real love, built on trust rather than deceit. In the aftermath, as I piece my life back together, I cling to the belief that one day, I'll find a happiness that can't be destroyed by secrets. Until then, I move forward, step by step, guided by the lessons learned in the darkest chapters of my life.